5.3, solving equations. So this is kind of like 5.2 because we're still solving equations. Remember, when we're solving an equation, we're looking for what the equation is equal to 0. That would be an answer. So what the equation, if I put into the equation, will be equal to 0. That's called the zero product property. Okay, that's what we use to figure out what the roots. Roots, 0, solving, those all mean the same thing. So first, it says, what are the real or imaginary? So there could be real or imaginary, meaning our answer could have I in them for each solution. So when I'm looking at this, the first thing I need to do is to solve this for 0. So I have to move this over. So I can have 2x cubed minus 5x squared minus 3x is equal to 0. First step is to take out an x from each one. They all have an x in common. I can take out an x. So I have 2x squared minus 5x minus 3 is equal to 0. I need to factor this now. So this is either guess and check or box method, however you choose. I'm going to use guess and check. The only option I have for my first term is a 2. So I have to have a 2x and a 1x because 2x times 1x gives me a 2x squared. Now the only option I have for 3 are 3 and 1. So I'm going to put my 3 over here and I'm going to put my 1 over here. So this is me guessing. Now if I check this, this would give me 6x. This gives me 1x. I need to have this add together to get me a negative 5. One of these two have to be negative. If I put the negative with my 6, now when I add these together, this gives me negative 5x. So I'm going to keep that negative with the 6. So this would be negative right here. So then this one has to be positive. Now, if I check this again, 1 times negative 3 gives me negative 3. This gives me a negative 5. And here's my negative 2, or my 2x squared. Now when I'm actually solving, I set each of these equal to 0 and I solve. So I already have my x equals 0. That's already solved. When I solve this equation, I subtract my 2 over. So that would give me a negative 1 and then divide by 2. So 1, negative 1 half. And then over here, I'm going to add my 3. So my 3 zeros would be 0, negative 1 half, and 3. Those are my 3 answers to this equation. I want you to pause the video and try to do B by yourself. If you're stuck, first step should be subtracting the 6 over. Make sure this is in standard form. I notice I can take out a 3 and an x squared out of all these. So I'm left with x squared minus 2x plus 4. So for this problem, I can solve for this 0 right here. This one I can't factor because the two numbers have to be both negative to multiply to get a positive. So either I'm dealing with negative 4 and negative 1, well, that won't add together to get negative 2, or negative 2 and negative 2, which also doesn't work to get negative 2. So I know for sure this has to be set equal to 0. So this answer would be equal to 0 because the only number I can plug in here that gets 0 is 0. So I'm going to already write part of my answer down here because this answer for my root is 0. Here, though, I have to use my quadratic formula. So 1 would be equal to A, negative 2 is equal to B, and 4 is equal to C. Now if I use my quadratic formula opposite B plus or minus the square root, make sure to put this in parentheses, B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. And I get 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 12 over 2. I can simplify this. This is the same thing as 6 times 2, 2 times 3. So this right here, I can take 1 2 out. So I'm going to take out a 2. This is also going to be an I because it's negative. So I'm going to take out that I, and I'm still left with the square root 3 right here. So this would be equal to 2 plus or minus 2I square root 3 over 2. You look at your heart. All of these are divisible by 2. So I have my 0 at 0. And I also can divide each of these by 2. So it'd be 1 plus or minus 1I squared 3 over 1. This right here is my final answer. I want you to pause the video and try to do C by yourself. Since this is already factored, I can already set these equal to 0. Here I would take this, or x squared is equal to 1. Opposite of squaring something is taking the square root. Remember, I should have two answers for this. So x would be equal to positive or negative. The square root of 1 is 1. Here I subtract my 4 over and then take my square root. Now this, because it's negative, if x is equal to, I still am going to have my positive answer, positive negative because of the squared. Square root of 4 is 2. Because it's negative, it will have an I with it. I want you to pause the video and try to do D by yourself. So I'd have to subtract that over. That would go in the middle. I would have to add this over. Those two combined like terms would give me 6. All of these have an x cubed in common. So I have an x cubed on the outside. I can factor this now. This one's factorable. They have to multiply to get a positive 6. So both of these have to be negative. Multiply to get a positive 6 and add together to get a negative 5. So that's why I chose negative 2 and negative 3. Now, this one would have 0. So x is equal to 0 with a multiplicity of 3. So that's what they're saying. At 0, this happens 3 times. I have x minus 2 equals 0 and x minus 3 equals 0. So my other two answers here would have to add the 2. Here I have to add the 3. So my possible zeros for this equation is 0, 2, and 3. Now we're going to get into factor by grouping. Now, if you want to read over all these kind of shortcuts, but it's not always the best thing to remember shortcuts, but you sure can if you wish to. If we're factoring by grouping, how do we know if we have to factor by grouping? Well, I'm going to move these over. So first step is always setting this equal to 0. X cubed plus 8x squared plus 2x, because I'm adding it over to the other side, plus 16 equals 0. Factor by grouping would be if I have an x cubed, so I have 4 terms here, but none of them have an x equal to each other to factor out. What I do is I group my first 2 terms and I group my second 2 terms. Once they're already in standard form, I look, what do these two have in common you can take out? So I can take out an x squared here, leaving with x plus 8. Here I can take out a 2, leaving me with x plus 8. Now this is the key part. I'm not going to group anything else. Notice how I'm using, this is like my thinking process. So when I'm factored by grouping, anything that they have in common with, that would go in a parenthesis with my second group. So this one has a 2 in common. Okay, that's where this x squared came from, and that's where this 2 came from. And then there would be one more parenthesis, just one, at 8. You do not write this 2 times. This has a degree of 3. It still has a degree of 3. Now I can set both of these equal to 0 and solve. So for this first one, I would subtract over my 2 and then take my square root. Now right here, this should have 2 answers. So x is equal to positive negative because of this squared. Because this is negative right here, this has to have an I and square root 2. I can't simplify that any further. Comma, my other answer would be subtracting 8 on both sides. So my 3 roots here are 1, 2, 3. So this is my final answer. I would like you to try to do 3 or B by yourself. You should have gotten positive negative 2i and negative 2/3. Positive negative 2i and negative 2/3. Pause the video and look over my work if you did not get that. Okay, we're going to end with A right here. Now, this is a little bit different. We're not going to solve by grouping. Again, first step is to set this equal to 0. So x to the 4th minus 3x squared minus 4 is equal to 0. Now, the difference between this, I should have 4 answers because my degree here is 4. However, I'm going down by a power of 2. So I can still factor this like we have in the past, except now when I break up x to the 4th, I'm going to break it, instead of having an x and an x here, I'm going to have x squared and x squared. So now I see that x squared times x squared will still give me my x to the 4th. Now this pattern is still going to stay the same as what we had before. So numbers that multiply to get negative 4, that add to get negative 3, would be a negative 4 and a positive 1. Now when I look at this, this will give me my x to the 4th. This together, my negative 4x squared plus 1x squared will give me my negative 3x squared, and this will still be negative 4. So this checks out if I multiply it. Because I just have one x in both of these parentheses now, I can set these both equal to 0 and solve. Always remembering your beginning has 4 answers. So for this first one, I can subtract 1, then take the square root. Now this is key. You should have 2 answers here. So this will be a positive negative 1 I, because the square root of negative is I, square root of 1 is 1. Here I'm going to add the 4, take the square root, and this would give me a positive negative because of the squared right here. But because this is positive, I'm just going to positive negative 2. So now I have 4 answers. 1, 2, 3, 4. This would be my final answer. I want you to try to do B now by yourself. So here I can factor 2 numbers that multiply to get 6, add to get 5. Both of them have to be positive because they have to multiply to get a positive. So I have x squared plus 2, x squared plus 3. Set them both equal to 0. Again, 2 answers here. That's where that positive negative comes from. Because this is the square root of a negative, that gives me my I, and I can't simplify my square root 2. And the same thing is here. 2 answers, I, because that's negative, and the square root 3. And that's all I have for you today. That's a long one. Have a great, grand, wonderful day.